There are moments when the world grows strangely intimate, when the boundary between what is inside and what is outside seems thinner than usual. You may be sitting alone, engaged in ordinary activity, yet suddenly a particular person rises into your awareness with an intensity that feels intrusive, almost deliberate. This is not simple memory, not casual nostalgia. It arrives with weight, with a sense of presence, as though something unseen has reached across distance to touch the psyche. In such moments, the rational mind searches for explanations, but the deeper layers of the soul already recognize the language being spoken. The human psyche is not isolated. It is porous, symbolic, and deeply relational. Beneath conscious thought lies a vast field where emotions, images, and intentions move freely, often without words. When another person thinks of you with focus and emotional charge, that energy does not remain confined to them. It enters this shared psychological field, and if your own inner state is receptive, you may feel it as a disturbance, a signal, a call. One unusual sign is the sudden appearance of this person in your inner imagery. You are not actively thinking of them, yet their face, their voice, or a specific memory surfaces repeatedly and insistently. This recurrence is not random. The psyche communicates through images, and when an image returns without conscious invitation, it suggests activation from beyond the ego. Something in you has been stirred, as if the unconscious has received a message and is translating it into familiar symbols. Another sign is a shift in your emotional atmosphere without an obvious cause. You may feel a wave of warmth, longing, anxiety, or tenderness that does not correspond to your immediate circumstances. Emotions do not always originate from personal events. They can be responses to relational currents. When someone directs sustained emotional attention toward you, especially unresolved or intense emotion, your own emotional field may resonate in response, much like a tuning fork vibrating when struck by a matching tone. A third sign appears through the body. You may notice a sudden tightness in the chest, a flutter in the stomach, or a subtle pressure around the heart or forehead when this person enters your thoughts. The body is often more honest than the intellect. It reacts before explanations are formed. Psychological energy seeks expression, and when it cannot be contained in thought alone, it manifests somatically, reminding you that the psyche is embodied and alive. Dreams offer a fourth sign. When a person begins to appear in your dreams with unusual clarity or frequency, especially if the dreams carry strong emotional charge, it indicates activation at a deep level. Dreams are the voice of the unconscious, speaking in symbols. If another person is thinking of you intensely, their image may be constellated within your dream world, not necessarily as themselves, but as symbols associated with them, suggesting an unseen dialogue taking place beyond waking awareness. The fifth sign is a sense of meaningful coincidence surrounding this person. You hear their name unexpectedly, encounter symbols connected to them, or receive information about them at precisely the moment you were thinking or feeling something related. These moments feel charged, significant, as though arranged. Such coincidences are not caused by linear logic, but by shared psychological meaning, revealing alignment between inner and outer events. A sixth sign is an inner compulsion to reach out, even without a clear reason. You may feel drawn to contact them, check on them, or simply hold them in mind. This impulse does not feel like desire alone. It feels responsive, as though you are answering something rather than initiating it. The psyche often responds to relational energy before the conscious mind understands why. Finally, there is the most subtle sign, a quiet certainty that resists explanation. Not a dramatic conviction, but a deep, wordless knowing that something is occurring beyond appearances. This knowing does not demand proof. It exists as a felt truth, arising from layers of the psyche older and wiser than rational thought. It is the same part of you that recognizes meaning in symbols, patterns, and myths, the part that understands connection as something more than physical proximity. These signs are not invitations to fantasy or obsession, but to awareness. They remind you that human beings are not isolated minds moving through an empty world. We are participants in a living psychological web, constantly influencing and responding to one another at levels we rarely acknowledge. To notice these signs is not to abandon reason, but to expand it, to include the reality that the psyche speaks in symbols, sensations, and synchronicity, and that sometimes when another person thinks of you with enough intensity, the soul listens long before the mind decides what it believes. The psyche is not a sealed chamber, locked away behind the walls of individual identity. as modern thinking so often assumes. It is not an isolated island floating alone in the vastness of the world. Rather, it is more like a breathing membrane, sensitive, permeable, constantly in quiet exchange with what lies beyond conscious awareness. When another person thinks of you with intensity, especially when those thoughts are charged with emotion, memory, longing, regret, or unresolved tension, that psychological energy does not remain contained within their private mind. It moves not through space as the body does, but through meaning, resonance, and shared inner structures that precede rational explanation. Human beings are bound together not only by social ties, but by deeper patterns that live beneath personal history. Long before language, long before deliberate thought, the psyche learned to respond to signals of presence and absence, closeness and separation. These ancient layers have not vanished. They remain active beneath the surface of daily life. When someone directs sustained attention toward you, especially from a place of emotional urgency, those deeper layers recognize the disturbance in the psychological field, even if the conscious mind remains unaware of the source. This is why certain thoughts arrive without invitation. You are not choosing to remember this person, not deliberately revisiting the past, yet their image presses itself into awareness with surprising force. The ego may protest, insisting that this is coincidence or habit, but the psyche does not operate according to the ego's preferences. It responds to activation. When a psychological connection is stimulated from one side, the other side often feels the echo, not as information, but as experience. Emotion plays a crucial role in this process. Neutral thoughts rarely travel far. It is emotion that carries weight, that gives thoughts density and direction. When someone thinks of you casually, the psyche remains undisturbed, but when those thoughts are saturated with feeling, especially feelings that have nowhere to go, they gather intensity. That intensity seeks resolution, expression, or recognition, and in doing so, it may cross into your inner world as a sudden mood shift, a sense of heaviness, warmth, restlessness, or longing that seems to arise from nowhere. The modern mind resists this idea because it challenges the illusion of psychological autonomy. We like to believe we are self-contained, that what we feel belongs neatly to us alone. Yet, lived experience repeatedly contradicts this belief. People enter a room and feel the tension without a word being spoken. They sense when someone is thinking of them fondly or with hostility. Even before evidence appears, these perceptions are often dismissed, but they persist because they arise from a level of awareness that does not rely on logic. The body often becomes the messenger when the psyche receives such signals. A tightening in the chest, a sudden fatigue, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, or a flutter in the stomach may accompany the unexpected thought of someone. These sensations are not symbolic metaphors, they are real physiological responses to psychological stimuli. The body reacts to meaning just as it reacts to danger or comfort, because meaning itself has survival value encoded deep within the nervous system. Distance does not dissolve this process. Physical separation matters far less than emotional proximity. Two people may live continents apart yet remain psychologically entangled, while others share the same space and feel nothing. The psyche is governed by significance, not geography. Where emotional investment exists, connection persists, sometimes long after conscious contact has ended. What makes this phenomenon unsettling is its involuntary nature. You do not choose when it happens. You may actively try to forget someone, yet feel their presence most strongly when you least expect it. This lack of control is precisely what reveals the operation of unconscious forces. The unconscious does not obey intention. It responds to energy, conflict, and unresolved meaning. Such moments often provoke inner resistance. The rational mind rushes to dismiss them as imagination, habit, or coincidence. Yet the persistence of the experience tells a different story. If it were mere randomness, it would fade quickly. Instead, it returns, sometimes rhythmically, sometimes in waves, suggesting an ongoing exchange rather than a fleeting thought. This does not imply mysticism in the superficial sense, nor does it require belief in anything supernatural. It requires only recognition that the psyche is relational by nature. From birth, consciousness develops in response to others. Identity itself is shaped through mirroring, attachment, and emotional exchange. To assume that this relational structure suddenly stops at adulthood is an intellectual convenience, not a psychological truth. When another person thinks of you intensely, especially from a place of unresolved emotion, their psyche is activated around your image. That activation stirs the shared symbolic material that once connected you and through that shared material, your own psyche may respond. The response is rarely verbal. It arrives as feeling, image, sensation, or needs, bypassing conscious filters. The danger lies not in acknowledging this permeability, but in misinterpreting it. Awareness should not lead to obsession or fantasy, but to grounded reflection. The experience is an invitation to observe, not to act impulsively. It asks for inner dialogue rather than external reaction, for understanding rather than projection. To recognize that the psyche is not sealed is to accept a deeper responsibility for one's inner life. It means understanding that thoughts and emotions carry weight, that attention itself is a form of energy, and that human connection does not end where physical interaction stops. It continues in subtle ways, shaping moods, dreams, and perceptions, influencing the inner climate in which daily life unfolds, moving quietly beneath the surface of awareness, persistent, alive, and responsive life. An unseen current flowing between minds that once touched and have never fully let go. Uninvited images, emotion, and bodily sensations rarely arise without cause. Even when the conscious mind insists on randomness, the psyche does not operate like a disciplined messenger that waits for permission before delivering its content. It interrupts, intrudes, and insists, especially when something meaningful is attempting to cross the threshold of awareness. When a person enters your inner world without invitation, appearing in thoughts, feelings, or physical sensation that you did not consciously summon, it signals activation from a source beyond deliberate intention. Images are the first language of the unconscious, long before words are formed. Psyche thinks in pictures, scenes, and symbolic impressions. When the image of a specific person suddenly surfaces, vivid and emotionally charged, it is not merely memory replaying itself. Memory tends to follow association and context, but these intrusions arrive without context, disrupting the flow of thought. They carry a sense of urgency or presence, as though the image is not recalling the past but announcing itself in the present. Emotions often accompany these images, and their intensity can be disproportionate to the thought itself. A fleeting mental picture should not, by logic, provoke a wave of sadness, warmth, anxiety, or longing. Yet it often does. This disproportion reveals that the emotion does not originate from the current situation, but from a deeper relational layer that has been stirred. Emotion is energy in motion, and when it arises suddenly and without explanation, it suggests that something has been activated beneath the surface. The body responds to this activation before the mind can interpret it. A sudden heaviness in the chest, a pressure in the throat, a subtle ache, or a tingling sensation may emerge alongside the uninvited thought. These bodily signals are not metaphors, they are the psyche speaking through its most honest medium. The body reacts to psychological meaning with the same immediacy that it reacts to physical threat or safety. It does not ask whether the source is internal or external, it responds to significance. What makes these experiences difficult to accept is their lack of narrative. There is often no story attached, no clear explanation, no logical sequence that would justify their arrival. The conscious mind prefers causes it can trace and control. When it cannot, it dismisses the experience as imagination or coincidence. Yet the psyche is not bound by linear causality. It operates through resonance. When something in the inner world vibrates at the same frequency as something outside conscious awareness, activation occurs. This activation is especially strong when there is unresolved emotional material between two people. Unspoken words, unfinished relationships, suppressed longing, guilt, or resentment do not simply disappear because time has passed. They remain stored in the unconscious, waiting for a moment of release or recognition. When one person begins to think intensely about the other, particularly from this unresolved place, that stored material is stirred on both sides of the connection. The intrusion of such material can feel uncomfortable, even invasive. You may find yourself asking why this person is occupying your inner space, when you have made no effort to invite them. This discomfort arises because the ego experiences these intrusions as a loss of control. Yet, from the perspective of the psyche, control was never the governing principle. Meaning was. These experiences often repeat in patterns. The same image returns at similar times of day. The same sensation appears when your attention relaxes. The same emotional tone washes over you without warning. Patterns are the psyche's way of insisting that something be noticed. Random events do not repeat with symbolic consistency. Meaningful activations do. Sleep and moments of mental quiet intensify this phenomenon. When the ego's defenses soften, the unconscious gains easier access to awareness. This is why such intrusions often occur at night, during rest, or in moments of boredom. The mind is no longer busy maintaining structure, and the psyche takes the opportunity to express what has been activated. Importantly, these intrusions do not demand immediate action. They are not commands, they are signals. They ask to be observed, reflected upon, and integrated. The mistake is to assume that feeling something means you must do something. Often, the task is simply to recognize that an exchange is occurring at a level deeper than conscious intention. The psyche is not interested in convenience, is interested in wholeness. When uninvited thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations arise, they are attempts to restore balance by bringing unconscious material into awareness. Whether or not you act on that awareness is a separate matter. The activation itself is already a form of communication. Modern life trains the mind to override these signals, to explain them away or drown them in distraction. Yet they persist, because they originate from a layer of being that is older and more persistent than conscious habits. They carry the imprint of relationship, memory, and emotional truth. To acknowledge these intrusions is not to abandon reason but to expand it. It is to accept that not all information arrives through deliberate thought, and not all communication is verbal. Some messages arrive as images that will not leave, emotions that do not belong to the moment, and sensations that appear without physical cause. These are not errors in the system. They are evidence of a psyche that is alive, responsive, and continuously engaged with forces beyond the narrow boundaries of conscious will, moving quietly through the inner landscape, demanding attention, not through words but through experience itself. Dreams and meaningful coincidences are among the most subtle yet revealing ways the psyche communicates the existence of unseen psychological connection. They do not announce themselves loudly, nor do they ask for belief. They simply occur, quietly rearranging the inner and outer world until something that was hidden begins to make itself known. When a person is thinking of you with intensity, especially from a place charged with emotion, this activity often bypasses waking consciousness and enters through symbolic channels where logic holds little authority. Dreams are not random productions of a resting brain. They are structured expressions of unconscious life shaped by emotion, memory, and symbolic meaning. When a specific person begins to appear repeatedly in dreams, particularly when you have not been consciously preoccupied with them, it suggests activation at a depth the waking mind cannot easily access. The psyche does not waste energy without reason. Recurring dream figures indicate unfinished psychological business, not necessarily unfinished action, but unfinished meaning. In dreams, this person may not appear as themselves. They may take on different faces, roles, or forms, yet carry the same emotional signature. The unconscious is less interested in literal accuracy than in psychological truth. What matters is the feeling attached to the image, the tone of the interaction, the atmosphere created by their presence. These elements reveal the nature of the connection more clearly than recognizable features ever could. The emotional intensity of such dreams is often disproportionate. You may wake with a lingering sense of closeness, grief, unease, or longing that does not fade quickly. This persistence indicates that the dream was not merely processing daily residue, but responding to an active psychological stimulus. When another person's thoughts are charged and directed, they stir the shared symbolic field in which both psyches participate, and the dream becomes the meeting place. Coincidences function in a similar way, though they occur in waking life. A coincidence becomes meaningful not because it is statistically rare, but because it aligns inner experience with outer events in a way that feels purposeful. You think of someone and immediately encounter their name, their message, or a symbol strongly associated with them. You feel an unexplained emotional shift, and shortly afterward something external appears that mirrors or confirms that inner state. These moments resist rational explanation because they do not follow linear causality. One does not cause the other in a mechanical sense. Instead, both arise from a shared underlying meaning. The psyche organizes experience according to significance, not sequence. When inner and outer events align around the same emotional or symbolic center, the result feels charged, as though something unseen has briefly surfaced. What makes these coincidences so unsettling is their timing. They arrive precisely when the mind is least prepared, when defenses are lowered or attention is turned inward. The precision creates a sense of dialogue rather than chance. It feels as though something is responding, as though the world itself is echoing a private experience. The modern mind often dismisses such moments to preserve a sense of control. To accept them would require acknowledging that consciousness is not the sole author of experience. Yet throughout history, human beings have recognized these alignments as expression of deeper order, one that does not negate reason but exists alongside it. Dreams and coincidences intensify when emotional bonds remain unresolved. Closure is not a conscious decision, it is a psychological process. When meaning remains unfinished, the psyche continues to seek integration. Another person thinking of you from this unresolved place can reactivate the bond, bringing it into awareness through symbolic means rather than direct contact. Silence between two people does not imply psychological distance. In fact, silence often amplifies unconscious communication. When words stop, symbols take over. Dreams speak what waking life avoids. Coincidences point to connections that the ego would rather deny or forget. These experiences do not demand interpretation in the literal sense. The mistake is to ask what they predict or what action they require. Their purpose is not fortune-telling. Their purpose is revelation. They reveal that something within the psyche has been touched, that a relational thread remains active, vibrating beneath conscious awareness. The psyche chooses dreams and coincidences precisely because they bypass resistance. You cannot argue with a dream while you are inside it. You cannot prevent a coincidence from occurring once it has already happened. These events force the mind into a position of witnessing rather than controlling. Importantly, recognizing these signs does not mean surrendering autonomy. Awareness does not equal submission. It simply means acknowledging that the psyche participates in a wider field of meaning, one that includes other people, shared memories, and emotional resonance that transcends time and distance. When dreams grow vivid and coincidences cluster around a particular person, it is not an invitation to romanticize or obsess. It is an invitation to reflect inwardly. What remains unresolved? What emotion has not been fully integrated? What image continues to demand attention? The psyche is not interested in keeping the past alive for its own sake. It is interested in wholeness. Dreams and meaningful coincidences are tools it uses to draw attention to areas where fragmentation still exists. When another person's thoughts activate these areas, the psyche responds by weaving inner and outer events into patterns that cannot be ignored. These patterns do not shout, they whisper, they repeat, they persist quietly until they are seen for what they are. Signals of connection operating beneath the surface of conscious life, reminders that meaning does not require permission to emerge, and the unseen psychological bonds continue to shape experience long after conscious interaction has ended, expressing themselves through images that appear in sleep and moments that feel too precisely timed to be dismissed as mere chance. A quiet inner knowing does not announce itself with certainty or demand attention through force. It arrives softly, often beneath thought, beneath emotion, beneath any clear narrative the mind can grasp. It is not excitement, not fear, not hope, but a subtle sense of recognition that something is true before the intellect has gathered evidence. This knowing does not argue. It does not persuade. It simply exists, steady and persistent, like a low hum in the background of consciousness that refuses to be silenced. The modern mind is trained to distrust this kind of knowing. It demands proof, sequence, logic, and visible cause. Yet long before the intellect learned to organize reality into neat explanations, the psyche relied on intuitive recognition to survive, to bond, to sense danger, and to feel connection. This ancient mode of awareness has not disappeared. It has merely been overshadowed by louder mental processes. When it surfaces, it often does so quietly because it does not need to compete. It waits. This inner knowing is relational by nature. It awakens most clearly in connection with another person. You may simply know when someone is emotionally present, even from afar. You may sense when someone's attention is fixed on you, not through thought, but through a subtle shift in your inner atmosphere. There is no image, no word, no sensation dramatic enough to explain it, yet something within you recognizes a change, as if a familiar presence has entered the room of the psyche. Unlike emotion, this knowing is calm. It does not rush or pull. It does not fluctuate wildly. Even when the content is uncomfortable, the knowing itself feels stable. This stability is what differentiates it from imagination or projection. Imagination is restless and easily altered by mood. Inner knowing remains consistent, even when the conscious mind attempts to override it with doubt. This form of awareness often precedes understanding. You may know something long before you can explain why you know it. Only later does logic catch up, assembling reasons, patterns, and explanations that justify what was already sensed. The knowing does not depend on these explanations, but it allows them to arrive in their own time. When another person thinks of you intensely, especially from an emotionally charged place, this knowing may awaken without any accompanying drama. You may simply feel a gentle certainty that you are present in someone else's inner world. There is no urgency to act, no impulse to prove it. It exists as a fact of experience rather than a thought to be debated. This quiet recognition is often mistaken for indifference because it lacks intensity. Yet, it is precisely its lack of intensity that reveals its depth. Intense emotions belong to the surface layers of the psyche, where conflicts and desires collide. Quiet knowing arises from deeper layers where truth is not negotiated, only perceived. The ego struggles with this because it threatens control. To accept inner knowing is to accept that not all truth is constructed through effort. Some truths are received. The ego prefers to be the author, not the witness. Yet the psyche contains dimensions where witnessing is the only role available. This knowing often emerges in moments of stillness, when mental noise subsides, when distractions fade, when the need to explain loosens its grip. The knowing becomes more noticeable. It does not require meditation or ritual, only a temporary suspension of the demand for certainty. There is a humility inherent in this state. You do not feel powerful for knowing. You do not feel special. You simply feel aligned with something that already exists. This humility protects the knowing from distortion. The moment it is inflated into belief or identity, it loses its clarity. Relational truth often lives in this space. You may know that a connection has not ended, even if communication has. You may know that someone is struggling internally, even if they present strength. You may know that a bond has shifted, even if nothing visible has changed. These truths do not arrive as conclusion, they arrive as recognition. The danger lies in confusing knowing with interpretation. Knowing is silent. Interpretation is noisy. The psyche offers the knowing first. The mind rushes in afterward, eager to label, explain, and predict. When interpretation dominates, the original clarity is often lost. The task is not to suppress interpretation, but to recognize its secondary role. This inner knowing does not demand action. It does not instruct you to reach out, withdraw, or decide. It simply illuminates. What you do with that illumination remains a conscious choice. Awareness does not remove responsibility, it deepens it. Time does not weaken this knowing. In fact, it often becomes clearer as time passes, precisely because emotional turbulence fades while deeper recognition remains. What was once obscured by desire, fear, or confusion gradually reveals its shape. Skepticism does not destroy this knowing. You may doubt it repeatedly, test it against logic, dismiss it, and it will still return in the same quiet form. It does not need your belief to exist. It persists independently of agreement. This is why it is so difficult to communicate to others. Words flatten it. Explanations distort it. It is meant to be lived internally, not defended externally. Attempts to convince others of it usually indicate that one has already lost contact with its quiet certainty. When relational truth is recognized in this way, it brings a sense of inner coherence. Things align subtly. Emotional confusion lessens, not because answers are found, but because contradiction dissolves. You no longer fight what you already know. This knowing does not eliminate mystery. It coexists with it. You may know that a connection exists without knowing what it means or where it leads. The psyche does not rush toward outcomes. It honors process. To live with this kind of awareness requires patience. The world rewards decisiveness, clarity, and visible proof. Inner knowing offers none of these. It offers alignment instead, a sense of being inwardly attuned to reality as it unfolds. When logic finally arrives, it often confirms what was already sensed. When it does not, the knowing remains unchanged. Logic operates within time. Inner knowing exists outside urgency. This quiet recognition is not rare. It is simply ignored. When noticed, it reveals that the psyche possesses its own form of intelligence, one that recognizes relational truth before the mind constructs explanation, one that perceives connection without evidence, one that understands meaning without language, remaining present beneath thought, beneath emotion, beneath the need to conclude, steady, observant. and silently aware of bonds that reason may question but cannot erase.